The shrill beeping of the alarm clock pulled Jessica Parker from her dreamless sleep. She groaned and slapped at her phone, silencing it before rolling onto her back to stare at the ceiling. Another day, another flight. 7 years at Skyline Airways had turned the once exciting job into just that, a job. She went through her morning routine on autopilot: shower, makeup, hair pulled back in a neat bun, uniform pressed and perfect. The navy blue Skyline Airways blazer had once made her feel proud. Now it was just another part of the mask she put on. Looking sharp as always, her roommate Tina commented, watching Jessica adjust her scarf in the hallway mirror. Someone has to maintain standards, Jessica replied, checking her watch. Chicago to San Francisco today. Probably another nightmare, Tina shrugged. At least you get to see the Golden Gate. From the airport hotel, maybe. The ride to O'Hare was crowded, matching Jessica's mood. By the time she cleared security and reached the crew room, the day's complications were already piling up. Flight 372 is delayed 2 hours, announced Craig, the flight captain, during their pre-flight briefing. Maintenance issue with the plane. And it's overbooked. Lisa, the senior flight attendant, groaned. Perfect. Just what we need, Jessica muttered, checking the passenger manifest. A full flight with cranky passengers. We'll manage, Lisa said, though her face suggested otherwise. Jessica, you take main cabin today. I'll handle first class. Jessica nodded, hiding her disappointment. Another day in the trenches while Lisa served champagne to executives and vacationers who could afford the upgrade. The next 2 hours crawled by. Jessica helped handle rebookings, dealt with complaints, and fielded endless questions from passengers who couldn't grasp why mechanical issues might delay a several-ton flying machine. No, sir, we can't just use another plane, she explained to an agitated businessman, maintaining her professional smile while wanting to scream. All our aircraft are scheduled for specific routes. By the time boarding finally began, Jessica's patience had worn tissue thin. The line of passengers seemed endless, each with their own grievances and oversized carry-ons they insisted would fit in the overhead bins. Ma'am, that bag is clearly too large, Jessica said to a woman trying to bring what looked like a small refrigerator aboard. You'll need to check it. But I have valuables in here. Then you should have packed them in something that meets our size requirements. The woman huffed but complied, joining the growing number of disgruntled passengers Jessica had corrected. She took a small, petty satisfaction in enforcing the rules. At least someone had to maintain order in this chaos. 3/4 through boarding, when most passengers were seated and the overhead bins were nearly full, Jessica spotted them coming down the jetway, a family arriving late. Of course, the father looked exhausted, his suit wrinkled as though he'd slept in it. He carried a sleeping toddler against his shoulder, the child's face buried in the man's neck. Behind him, a woman juggled another child, a boy around 5 or 6, along with what seemed like a dozen bags. Jessica felt her jaw tighten. Late boarders were bad enough. Late boarders with children were her personal nightmare. Boarding passes, please, she said, not bothering to hide the edge in her voice. The man shifted the sleeping child to reach into his pocket. Sorry, we're late. Our connection was... Boarding passes, Jessica repeated, cutting him off. She didn't need excuses. The woman fumbled with the documents while trying to keep hold of the squirming boy and their bags. One tote slipped, spilling snacks and toys onto the floor of the jetway. Jessica made no move to help as the woman scrambled to gather the items. Several passengers behind them sighed loudly. We're holding up the line, Jessica pointed out unnecessarily. The man's face flushed as he handed over 4 boarding passes. Jessica scanned them quickly, noting the seat assignments in the family section. Unfortunately for them, the flight's overbooking had complicated everything. These seats are no longer available, she announced. The man blinked. But we booked them months ago. It's the family section. The flight is overbooked, and due to your late arrival, those seats have been reassigned. This wasn't entirely true. One of the seats was still available, but Jessica had already decided this family would be a problem. Please, the woman said, her voice tired but polite. The children need to sit with us. My son gets anxious on planes. Many passengers have special requests, Jessica replied. We accommodate them when possible, but when you arrive this late... The man shifted the sleeping child again, who stirred but didn't wake. Look, we've had a really rough day. We're coming back from visiting my wife's mother. She's in the hospital and we've been traveling since dawn. Is there any way... I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do, Jessica interrupted, though she hadn't actually checked alternatives. We have one seat in row 18, one in row 25, and two in row 32. The woman's eyes widened. You want us to sit separately? With a toddler and a 6-year-old? You should have considered that before arriving late, Jessica said, aware of other crew members watching. She needed to maintain control of the situation. Those are the only seats available. A few passengers in the boarding line exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older woman behind the family spoke up. I'm in row 18. I'd be happy to switch with someone so they can sit together. Jessica felt a flash of annoyance at the interference. That's very kind, but it would delay boarding further. And we're already behind schedule. It would take 2 minutes, the man said, a note of frustration finally breaking through his politeness. Sir, you're holding up the line, Jessica countered. You need to take your assigned seats or wait for the next flight. The threat hung in the air. The next flight wasn't until tomorrow. The family exchanged desperate looks before the woman nodded slightly to her husband. We'll take what's available, she said quietly. Jessica directed them to their scattered seats with brisk efficiency, ignoring the whispers from other passengers. As the family made their way down the aisle, she overheard one passenger murmur to another, "That was unnecessary." She pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the remaining passengers. Rules existed for a reason. If she started making exceptions, where would it end? As the final passengers boarded, Jessica noticed Lisa watching her from the first-class cabin, a slight frown on her face. Jessica straightened her blazer defensively. She was just doing her job. The pre-flight announcements went smoothly, but as they prepared for takeoff, Jessica spotted the family's older child beginning to panic in his seat, separated from both parents. The boy's breathing grew rapid, his small hands gripping the armrests. A passenger beside him signaled for assistance. He's really scared, the passenger explained when Jessica approached. I think he needs his parents. Jessica glanced at the trembling child, then at the takeoff time. They were already delayed. Any further disruption would only make things worse. The seatbelt sign is on. Everyone needs to remain seated, she stated firmly. But he's just a kid, the passenger protested. Rules apply to everyone, Jessica replied. She turned to the boy, softening her voice slightly but keeping it professional. You need to calm down. Crying won't help. The boy's eyes welled with tears, but Jessica had already moved on. Behind her, the passenger who'd tried to help shook her head in disbelief. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Jessica caught sight of the father, straining to look back at his son while balancing the sleeping toddler. Their eyes met briefly. His contained no anger, just a profound weariness that Jessica chose to ignore. The plane taxied toward the runway, the Chicago skyline visible through the windows. Another day, another flight. Jessica had maintained order, enforced the rules. That was her job. She didn't notice the quiet businessman in first class watching the entire scene with thoughtful eyes, making mental notes as the plane lifted into the clouds. The seatbelt sign dinged off as Flight 372 reached cruising altitude. Jessica unbuckled and rose to her feet, straightening her uniform before beginning the in-flight service. Through the cabin, passengers were settling in for the 4-hour journey to San Francisco, adjusting air vents and rummaging through bags for headphones and books. Jessica noticed the Martinez boy still looked upset in his seat, rows away from either parent. His eyes were red from crying, though he'd quieted down. The passenger beside him, an elderly woman with silver hair, had given him a pack of tissues and was speaking to him softly. For a fleeting moment, Jessica felt a twinge of something, not quite guilt, but discomfort. She pushed it away. The plane was full. Rules were rules. She hadn't made them late. Prepare for beverage service, Lisa called from the galley where she was setting up the cart. Jessica joined her, arranging cups and ice. First class all settled? Perfect angels, Lisa said, lowering her voice. That family situation during boarding. Couldn't we have worked something out? Jessica stiffened. We were already delayed, and they were late. The connection from Detroit was delayed. Not their fault. Lisa gave her a long look. Just go easy on them, okay? Jessica didn't respond, focusing instead on arranging napkins. Lisa didn't understand. Give passengers an inch, they'd take a mile. You had to be firm. The beverage service moved slowly down the aisle. Jessica maintained her professional smile, passing out drinks and responding to requests. When she reached row 18, where the Martinez boy sat with the silver-haired woman, she hesitated. "Apple juice, please," the boy said quietly, his voice still wobbly. Jessica nodded and reached for a cup. As she poured, the plane hit a small pocket of turbulence. Juice sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the tray table. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, automatically reaching for napkins. "It's fine, dear," the silver-haired woman said. "Accidents happen." Jessica cleaned up the spill and continued down the aisle. When she reached row 25, where Mrs. Martinez sat with a businessman on one side and a teenage girl on the other, she nodded curtly. "Something to drink?" "Water, please," Mrs. Martinez said, then added, "Excuse me, but is there any chance my son could come sit with me during the flight? He's very upset." "The fasten seatbelt sign could come on at any time due to turbulence," Jessica replied. "For safety reasons, passengers need to remain in their assigned seats." This wasn't strictly true. Passengers moved around all the time during flights, but Jessica wasn't about to admit that. "Even children?" Mrs. Martinez pressed. "Especially children," Jessica countered. "They're less stable on their feet." The businessman beside Mrs. Martinez frowned. "Surely there's some flexibility for a family with young kids." Jessica kept her professional smile fixed in place. "I'm just following company policy, sir. Now, would you care for a beverage?" The conversation effectively shut down. Jessica continued her service. She deliberately skipped row 32, where Mr. Martinez sat with the sleeping toddler. 20 minutes later, a passenger flagged her down. "The gentleman in 32C hasn't been offered a drink," the passenger said, pointing toward Mr. Martinez. "I must have missed him," Jessica said, though they both knew better. "I'll circle back." She didn't. Instead, she busied herself with other tasks, collecting trash and responding to call buttons. When the toddler woke up crying from the pressure in her ears during a slight altitude adjustment, Jessica walked by with a pointed look. "Some passengers are trying to rest," she said loudly enough for those in nearby seats to hear. "Please try to keep your child quiet." Mr. Martinez fumbled in his bag. "I'm looking for her pacifier. It helps with the ear pressure. Some people shouldn't travel with children they can't control," Jessica remarked, not quite under her breath. Several passengers looked up in surprise at her tone. The toddler's cries grew louder. Mr. Martinez found the pacifier, but the little girl pushed it away, her face red with distress. "I'm sorry," he said to the passengers around him. "She's usually good on planes. It's been a long day." An older man across the aisle smiled kindly. "Don't worry about it. My grandkids are the same. Try a drink of water. Sometimes swallowing helps their ears." Jessica watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. The last thing she needed was passengers encouraging disruptions. "Sir," she addressed Mr. Martinez, "if you can't quiet your child, I may need to move you to the rear galley area." "That won't be necessary," he replied calmly, though his exhaustion showed in the dark circles under his eyes. "She'll settle soon." Sure enough, after a few minutes of gentle bouncing and humming, the toddler's cries subsided to hiccuping sobs, then quiet whimpers against her father's shoulder. Jessica moved on, but kept the Martinez family in her sights. When the meal service began, she made sure to serve them last in each section. When Mrs. Martinez requested a blanket for her shivering son, Jessica told her they were out, then gave the last one to another passenger 10 minutes later, making sure Mrs. Martinez noticed. 2 hours into the flight, the boy in row 18 needed to use the bathroom. The silver-haired woman buzzed for assistance. "He's afraid to go alone," she explained when Jessica arrived. "Could someone take him to his mother first?" "The lavatories are just 3 rows back," Jessica pointed out. "He can see them from here." "He's 6, the woman said flatly. Jessica sighed dramatically. "I'll take him." She escorted the boy to the lavatory, standing outside with her arms crossed. When he emerged, instead of returning him to his seat, she led him to where his mother sat. "Your son needs supervision," she told Mrs. Martinez. "He can visit briefly, but then needs to return to his assigned seat." Mrs. Martinez hugged her son close. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude in her voice despite Jessica's tone. The boy clung to his mother. "I don't want to go back to my seat," he whispered. "I'm scared." 5 minutes, Jessica said firmly. "Then he returns." As she walked away, she heard the businessman next to Mrs. Martinez say quietly, I've never seen a flight attendant act like this. You should report her." Jessica felt her cheeks flush with anger. They didn't understand the pressures of her job, the need for order and rules. Later, when the boy returned to his seat, his foot accidentally nudged the seat in front. The passenger didn't seem to notice, absorbed in a movie on her tablet, but Jessica happened to be passing by. She stopped, leaning down to address the boy. "Please keep your feet to yourself. Other passengers paid for their space too." Then she picked up the intercom and made a general announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be mindful of other passengers' personal space. Keep feet, knees, and elbows within your own seating area." The boy shrank in his seat, face burning with embarrassment as several passengers glanced his way. The silver-haired woman beside him patted his hand. "Don't worry, dear. She wasn't really talking about you." But they both knew she was. As the flight progressed, Jessica found more ways to single out the Martinez family. When she collected trash and Mr. Martinez handed her a used napkin and empty cup, she made a show of putting on gloves first. When Mrs. Martinez asked if her son could have a second package of pretzels, Jessica informed her loudly that additional snacks cost extra. "Standard policy," she added, though it wasn't. Throughout it all, the Martinez parents maintained a quiet dignity that somehow irritated Jessica even more. They didn't complain or argue or demand to speak to her supervisor. They simply endured, apologizing when necessary and thanking her for even the smallest service which she provided grudgingly. Other passengers noticed. Whispers traveled through the cabin. Some offered help to the family, sharing snacks, offering to switch seats, engaging the boy in conversation to distract him. The quiet businessman in first class made a point of walking back to the main cabin during a period of smooth flying. He paused near Mr. Martinez's row, observing the toddler now peacefully playing with a small toy. "Cute kid," he commented. "Rough flight." Mr. Martinez nodded. "We'll survive." "Just eager to get home," the businessman smiled. "I understand completely." He glanced toward Jessica, who was watching the interaction with suspicion. "Interesting crew on this airline. Every job has its challenges," Mr. Martinez replied diplomatically. The businessman raised an eyebrow, impressed by the response. He nodded once before returning to first class, making a note in his phone as he walked. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Jessica noticed the Martinez family had stopped trying to interact with her at all. They'd gotten the message. Good, she thought. Maybe next time they'd plan better, arrive earlier, control their children. She didn't notice how the other flight attendants had started covering for her, quietly bringing the family water and extra snacks when she wasn't looking. She didn't see Lisa shaking her head in disappointment after witnessing another sharp comment. When the plane touched down at SFO and passengers began gathering their belongings, Jessica made one final announcement. "Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate. For those continuing on to other destinations, Skyline Airways, thanks you for your patience during today's delay. For those whose journey ends here in San Francisco, we hope the experience met your expectations." As she said it, her eyes met Mr. Martinez's. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, an assessment. Then he looked away, gathering his sleeping toddler and preparing to finally reunite his family. 3 days after the Chicago to San Francisco flight, Jessica's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. as usual. She had a short break in her schedule, just enough time to do laundry and catch up on sleep before her next rotation. Rolling out of bed, she checked her phone to find an unexpected email from Skyline Airways management. Subject: mandatory meeting, 10 a.m. today. Jessica frowned. She wasn't scheduled for any meetings. Reading further, her stomach tightened. Your presence is required at Skyline headquarters for a meeting with upper management regarding passenger experience. Attendance is mandatory. Professional attire required. No explanation, no details. Just an order to appear. Jessica typed a quick reply asking for clarification, but received an automatic response that the sender wasn't monitoring the inbox. What could this be about? She muttered, already mentally reviewing recent flights for any major incidents. Nothing came to mind except perhaps the delay on the Chicago flight. But that had been a maintenance issue, not her fault. Her roommate Tina shuffled into the kitchen as Jessica brewed coffee. You're up early for a day off. Not a day off anymore, Jessica replied, showing her the email. Called into headquarters. Tina raised her eyebrows. Sounds serious. You in trouble? Why would I be? Jessica snapped, then softened her tone. Sorry, just annoyed about losing my day off. But as she showered and dressed, a knot of worry formed in her stomach. In 7 years, she'd never been summoned like this. She chose her best suit, charcoal gray with a crisp white blouse, and spent extra time on her makeup and hair. Whatever this meeting was about, she'd look the part of a consummate professional. The Skyline Airways headquarters occupied the top floors of a gleaming downtown building. Jessica had been here for training sessions but rarely ventured to the executive floor. The receptionist directed her to Conference Room A, the large one used for major announcements and board meetings. Am I in the right place? Jessica double-checked. I'm just a flight attendant. The receptionist checked her tablet. Jessica Parker for the 10 a.m.? Yes, this is correct. Jessica arrived 15 minutes early, but the hallway outside the conference room already buzzed with activity. Several senior managers she recognized by sight but had never spoken to hurried past. Through the glass walls, she spotted the CEO himself, Richard Nolan, arranging papers at the head of the table. Her mouth went dry. What on earth had she done to warrant the CEO's attention? At precisely 10 a.m., an assistant opened the door. Ms. Parker? They're ready for you. Jessica smoothed her jacket and walked in with her head high, though her heart hammered in her chest. Around the massive table sat the entire executive team, the CEO, the COO, the head of human resources, and several vice presidents. At the far end, a man had his back to her as he poured a glass of water. Ms. Parker, thank you for joining us, Richard Nolan said, his tone unreadable. Please take a seat. Jessica slid into the empty chair nearest the door, feeling like a defendant at trial. Do you know why you're here? The HR director asked. No, ma'am, I don't. Jessica answered honestly. Then allow me to introduce our newest board member. Nolan continued, gesturing to the man at the end of the table. He specifically requested your presence today. The man turned and Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. Mr. Martinez. Not in a rumpled suit this time, but in an impeccably tailored one. No exhausted expression or sleeping toddler in his arms. He looked rested, confident, powerful, and vaguely amused at the shock on her face. Ms. Parker and I had the pleasure of flying together from Chicago to San Francisco this week, he said smoothly. Though I don't believe we were properly introduced. Carlos Martinez, majority shareholder of Skyline Airways. Jessica couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Majority shareholder? The man she'd humiliated for hours owned the airline? Mr. Martinez recently acquired a controlling interest in the company, Nolan explained, watching Jessica carefully. He's been conducting a series of undercover assessments of our customer experience, traveling as a regular passenger with his family to experience our service firsthand. The Chicago flight replayed in Jessica's mind in horrifying detail, separating the family despite available seats, deliberately skipping them during beverage service, making announcements aimed at embarrassing their children, the snide comments about parenting. She began, but her voice failed her. Mr. Martinez has compiled a rather detailed report on his experience, the HR director added. He shared it with the board this morning. Jessica's eyes darted around the table, taking in the grim expressions. They'd heard everything. Her career was over. Ms. Parker, Carlos Martinez said, leaning forward in his chair. Would you say your treatment of my family was typical of how you treat passengers? The question hung in the air. Jessica could lie, but what was the point? They must have pulled records, talked to other crew members, maybe even interviewed passengers. No, she admitted, finding her voice at last. It wasn't typical, really? Martinez raised an eyebrow. Because before boarding our flight, I reviewed your passenger feedback history. There's a pattern of complaints regarding your treatment of families with young children and economy passengers who don't meet certain expectations. Jessica stared at the table, humiliation burning through her. Look at me, please, Martinez requested, his voice surprisingly gentle. She forced herself to meet his gaze. What I want to understand is why, he said. You're clearly intelligent. Your technical performance evaluations are excellent. You know safety procedures better than most. You're punctual, organized, detail-oriented, all qualities we value. So why treat passengers, certain passengers, with such contempt? The room fell silent. Every eye was on Jessica. She started, then swallowed hard. The job can be stressful. Passengers don't respect boundaries. They make demands, ignore rules. Someone has to maintain order. And that someone is you? If not me, then who? The words came out more defensive than she intended. Every day we deal with hundreds of people who think their problems are the only ones that matter. Their connection, their comfort, their convenience. They don't see the bigger picture. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. And what is the bigger picture, Ms. Parker? The question caught her off guard. The overall operation, getting hundreds of people safely from point A to point B on schedule. Interesting. Martinez turned to the CEO. Richard, what would you say is the purpose of Skyline Airways? To provide safe, reliable air transportation while delivering exceptional customer service, Nolan replied automatically. See? That's where the disconnect happens, Martinez said, turning back to Jessica. The operation doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to serve people, our customers. Jessica felt her face flush. With all due respect, sir, it's easy to talk about customer service from a boardroom. Try maintaining that perspective when you're dealing with your 20th unreasonable demand of the day. A flicker of surprise crossed several executives' faces at her boldness, but Martinez actually smiled. Fair point, he conceded. Though I'd argue I've spent more time in the trenches this past month than anyone in this room. I didn't just fly your airline, Ms. Parker. I've flown every major carrier as a normal passenger in economy class, often with challenging circumstances. Delays, cancellations, missed connections. He opened a folder and slid several papers across the table toward her. These are passenger experience reports from my team. You'll notice Skyline ranks near the bottom for family travel and accessibility accommodations. That's not acceptable to me. Jessica glanced at the reports, her sense of dread growing. This wasn't just about her, it was a system-wide evaluation, and she'd become the face of everything wrong with the airline's approach. Am I being fired? She finally asked, deciding to face the inevitable head-on. The executives exchanged glances. Martinez leaned back in his chair. That would be the easy solution, wouldn't it? He mused. Fire the bad employee, issue a statement about our commitment to service. Problem solved. He stood and walked slowly around the table. But I didn't build successful companies by taking the easy way out. The way you treated my family was inexcusable, but it's also a symptom of deeper issues, training gaps, policy problems, and culture challenges within this airline. He stopped behind her chair. So no, Ms. Parker, you're not being fired today. Instead, you're being reassigned. Jessica turned to look up at him, confusion replacing fear. For the next month, you'll be removed from flight duty and assigned to a special project team I'm forming. You'll be reviewing every passenger complaint filed in the last year. You'll be shadowing customer service representatives dealing with angry customers. You'll be studying how other airlines handle family travel. And you'll be participating in a retraining program I'm designing with our HR team. He returned to his seat and fixed her with a steady gaze. At the end of that month, we'll have another conversation about your future with Skyline Airways. Does that sound fair? Fair, it was more than fair. It was merciful. Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good, Martinez said, because I believe people can change when given the right motivation and tools. My family and I gave you a chance to show your best self on that flight. Now I'm giving you another chance to find that better version of yourself here on the ground. He closed his folder. You start tomorrow. HR will send you the details this afternoon. The CEO stood, signaling the meeting was ending. Thank you for your time, Ms. Parker. That will be all for now. In a daze, Jessica rose and walked toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Martinez called after her. Ms. Parker? She turned. My son asked about you, after the flight. A sad smile crossed his face. He wanted to know why the lady in the blue uniform was so angry at our family. What we had done wrong. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. The innocent question of a child who assumed he must have done something terrible to deserve such treatment. I didn't know what to tell him. Martinez continued softly. Perhaps by the end of the month you can help me find an answer. Without waiting for a response, he turned back to the other executives. Jessica slipped out of the room, her perfect professional mask crumbling as the door closed behind her. Jessica's first day of reassignment began in a small, windowless room in the basement of Skyline Airways headquarters. The space contained nothing but a desk, computer, chair, and stacks of printed passenger complaint forms dating back a year. A note on the desk simply read, "Start here. Review all files. Summary report due Friday. CM." She hung her jacket on the back of the chair and sat down, staring at the mountain of paperwork. A nearby box held hundreds more complaints submitted electronically, printed and organized by date. Jessica pulled the first folder toward her with a sigh. Passenger in 14C claims flight attendant was rude and dismissive when asked for assistance with overhead bin. For hours, she read through complaint after complaint. Some seemed trivial. Passengers upset about running out of their preferred beverage choice or complaining about inevitable weather delays. But others described situations that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Elderly passengers left standing in the aisle without help. Parents separated from young children, medical needs ignored or minimized. By lunch, Jessica had sorted the complaints into categories, noticing patterns emerging. The most frequent complaints involved passengers feeling disrespected or dismissed by staff. By mid-afternoon, her neck ached and her eyes burned, but she kept reading. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. Lisa, the senior flight attendant from the Chicago flight, stood in the doorway with 2 coffee cups. "Thought you could use this," she said, placing 1 cup on the desk. Jessica accepted it gratefully. "Thanks, what are you doing here?" "Training session upstairs." Lisa glanced at the stacks of complaints. "So the rumors are true. You met the new boss the hard way." Jessica winced. "News travels fast. Faster than our planes." Lisa pulled up a spare chair. "For what it's worth, I tried to warn you on that flight." "The family and economy, I know," Jessica cut her off. "Believe me, I've replayed every moment of that flight 1,000 times since the meeting yesterday." Lisa nodded toward the complaints. "Finding anything interesting?" Jessica hesitated, then admitted, "Too many of these sound familiar." "Too many sound like me. We all have bad days," Lisa offered. "This goes beyond bad days. There's a pattern." Jessica gestured to a particularly thick stack. "These are all complaints about how families with children were treated. Reading them from the passenger perspective. It's not good, Lisa." Lisa sipped her coffee quietly. "What happens after you review all these?" "I don't know exactly. Martinez mentioned a retraining program he's designing, then another meeting to discuss my future with the airline." "You think he'll fire you?" Jessica shrugged. "He could have done that already." Lisa stood to leave. "Well, if anyone can survive this, it's you. You're nothing if not resilient." After Lisa left, Jessica returned to the complaints with renewed focus. By the end of the day, she had developed a spreadsheet tracking complaint types, frequency, and resolution status. She was surprised to discover that less than 30% received any meaningful response from the company. The next morning, a new note awaited her. 8:30 a.m. Room 420, Passenger Experience Workshop. In room 420, she found Carlos Martinez and a small team of consultants setting up for a presentation. 8 other Skyline employees sat around a conference table. 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants, 2 gate agents, and a baggage handler. All looked as confused as Jessica felt. "Good morning," Martinez greeted them. "Thank you all for participating in this pilot program. Each of you has been selected because your passenger feedback indicates opportunities for growth." A polite way of saying they were the worst-rated employees, Jessica thought. "For the next 3 weeks, we'll be reimagining the Skyline passenger experience together," Martinez continued. "But first, we need to understand what our passengers actually experience now." What followed was an eye-opening exercise. Using actors and a mock airplane cabin set up in the adjacent room, each employee had to experience flying as different types of passengers. An elderly person with mobility issues, a parent traveling alone with young children, a nervous first-time flyer, a business traveler on a tight connection. Jessica was assigned to be a mother traveling with twin toddlers and excessive carry-on luggage. The other participants played flight crew and fellow passengers, following scripts based on actual reported incidents. "Excuse me," Jessica said to the person playing a flight attendant, struggling with her bags and the squirming children. "Could I get some help?" "You should have checked those bags," came the curt reply. "I'm busy with pre-departure duties." As the simulation continued, Jessica experienced firsthand the stress of managing children while being treated as an inconvenience. By the end, she was genuinely frustrated and on the verge of tears. "Now," Martinez said when they reconvened, "what did you learn?" One by one, the participants shared their revelations. When Jessica's turn came, she spoke honestly. I never considered how it felt from their side. I was so focused on maintaining order and schedule that I forgot. These are people with real challenges, not just disruptions to my routine. Martinez nodded approvingly. Empathy is where service begins. The rest of the week brought more role-playing, case studies, and brutally honest discussions about passenger needs. Jessica threw herself into the work, partly to impress Martinez, but increasingly because she was genuinely interested in the insights. By Friday, she had completed her summary report on the complaint files and submitted it to Martinez. Instead of merely listing statistics, she had included recommendations for addressing the most common issues. She didn't expect a response, so she was surprised when her phone pinged with an email from him late Friday evening. Thoughtful analysis. Particularly interested in your suggestion for family pre-boarding protocols. Let's discuss Monday. CM the second week brought a new dimension to the program. Each morning began with passenger experience workshops, but the afternoons now included one-on-one sessions with Dr. Patel, a psychologist specializing in workplace behavior. Tell me about your background, Jessica, Dr. Patel asked during their first session. My background? I don't see how that's relevant to customer service training. Humor me, Dr. Patel said with a gentle smile. Reluctantly, Jessica shared the basics. Raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs, started working herself at 16, put herself through college while supporting her mother, who eventually died of cancer during Jessica's senior year. You've had to be very self-sufficient, Dr. Patel observed. I didn't have a choice. And how do you feel when you see passengers who seem, let's say, entitled? People who expect help without apparently having earned it? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Jessica shifted in her chair. I suppose I find it irritating, she admitted, especially people with resources who still complain about minor inconveniences. Like families who can afford to travel but don't seem prepared for it. Jessica felt a flash of defensiveness. Is this about the Martinez family? Because I've already admitted I was wrong there. This isn't about any specific incident, Dr. Patel assured her. I'm trying to help you understand your reactions when you see certain passengers, particularly those you perceive as privileged or unprepared. What feelings come up for you? Jessica started to give a practiced, professional answer, then stopped herself. If she wanted to keep her job, real honesty might be her only option. Resentment, she said finally. I see people who've had everything handed to them, who don't appreciate what they have. Meanwhile, some of us have had to fight for every opportunity. I see, Dr. Patel made a note. And has it occurred to you that you might be making assumptions about these passengers' lives and struggles based on very limited information? The question lingered in Jessica's mind long after the session ended. That night she couldn't sleep, thinking about all the snap judgments she'd made about passengers over the years. How many times had she been wrong? How many people had she misjudged, as she had misjudged Carlos Martinez? The third week of the program focused on practical solutions. The group developed new procedures for family boarding, improved communication protocols for delays, and better training methods for handling difficult situations. During her final session with Dr. Patel, Jessica reflected on what she'd learned. I've been using rules and procedures as a shield, she admitted. It was easier to enforce policies than to engage with people's needs. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing passengers as problems to manage rather than people to serve. That's an important insight, Dr. Patel said. What will you do with it? I'm not sure I'll get the chance to do anything, Jessica replied. My meeting with Martinez is tomorrow. He could still fire me. And if he doesn't? If you return to flying? Jessica considered this. I'd approach it differently. Listen more, judge less. Remember that behind every difficult passenger is a person with their own story. Dr. Patel smiled. I think you've learned more than you realize. The next morning, Jessica prepared for her meeting with Martinez. She dressed professionally but skipped the severe styling she usually adopted for work. Her presentation folder contained notes from the workshop, insights from her sessions with Dr. Patel, and a personal letter she'd written to the Martinez family, not expecting to send it, but needing to articulate her regret. As she rode the elevator to the executive floor, she felt strangely calm. Whatever happened today, she wasn't the same person who had boarded that flight from Chicago. Whether she remained at Skyline Airways or not, she would carry these lessons forward. The receptionist directed her to a different room this time. Not the imposing boardroom, but a smaller office with a view of the airport. Carlos Martinez sat alone reviewing documents. "Ms. Parker," he said, looking up as she entered, "please have a seat. We have much to discuss about your future." Carlos Martinez gestured for Jessica to sit in the chair across from his desk. Through the large windows behind him, planes taxied across the tarmac, specks of humanity visible through their tiny windows. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. All those lives in transit, depending on people like her to make their journeys better, not worse. "Before we discuss your future," Martinez began, "I'd like to hear your thoughts on the past month. What have you learned?" Jessica had prepared for this question, but now that the moment had arrived, rehearsed answers seemed inadequate. She decided on honesty instead. "I've learned that I was wrong," she said simply. "Not just on that flight with your family, but in my approach to the job for a long time. I've been using rules and procedures as weapons instead of tools. I've been judging passengers based on my assumptions about them, not seeing them as individuals with their own challenges." Martinez nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Go on." "The role-playing exercises showed me what it feels like to be on the receiving end of the treatment I've given others. It wasn't pleasant." Jessica paused, gathering her courage. "And the sessions with Dr. Patel helped me understand why I developed those habits in the first place. Which was, I grew up having to fight for everything. Nothing came easily. When I see passengers who seem entitled or unprepared, I resent them. I assume they've had easy lives and don't appreciate what they have." She met his eyes directly. "Like I assumed about your family. I saw a man in a wrinkled suit with crying children and immediately created a story about who you were. Inconsiderate, unprepared, entitled to special treatment you hadn't earned. And now? Now I understand that everyone has their story. Your suit was wrinkled because you'd been at your wife's mother's hospital bedside for days. Your children were upset because they'd been traveling since dawn after an emotional visit. None of that should have mattered anyway. You deserved basic respect and compassion regardless." Martinez studied her for a long moment. "That's a significant shift in perspective in just 1 month." "It hasn't been easy," Jessica admitted. "Facing your own biases never is, but necessary." Martinez opened a folder on his desk and removed 2 documents. "I have 2 options for you today, Ms. Parker." He slid the first document toward her. "This is a separation agreement. 6 months severance pay, a neutral reference for future employers, and a clean break from Skyline Airways." Jessica's heart sank. Despite having prepared herself for this possibility, she reached for the document with a slightly trembling hand. "The second option," Martinez continued, sliding another document across the desk, "is considerably more challenging." Jessica looked down at a job description. "Passenger Experience Task Force Lead." "I'm creating a new initiative," Martinez explained. "A team dedicated to transforming how Skyline Airways treats its most vulnerable travelers. Families with young children, elderly passengers, people with disabilities, first-time flyers. The goal is to make us the most inclusive and supportive airline in the industry." Jessica read the job description with growing disbelief. "And you want me to lead this?" "Who better?" Martinez leaned forward. "You've experienced both sides now. You understand the operational challenges our crew face, but you've also confronted the consequences of getting it wrong. Your analysis of our complaint patterns was insightful. Your recommendations from the workshop were practical and thoughtful. But after how I treated your family, this isn't about forgiveness, Ms. Parker. It's about transformation. Sometimes the people who've made the worst mistakes become the strongest advocates for change, precisely because they understand what's at stake." He gestured to the documents. "So which will it be?" Jessica looked between the papers, then back at Martinez. "Why would you trust me with this? I built my first company from nothing because someone took a chance on me when I didn't deserve it," he replied. "That taught me to look for potential where others might only see failure. You have potential, Ms. Parker. The question is, do you see it in yourself?" Jessica looked again at the job description. It would mean stepping away from flying, at least temporarily. It would mean facing colleagues who had surely heard about her humiliation of the owner's family. It would mean building something from scratch with no guarantee of success. It would also mean a chance to make amends, not just to the Martinez family, but to every passenger she'd ever mistreated. I choose the task force, she said firmly, pushing the severance agreement away. For the first time, Martinez smiled fully. I was hoping you would. He extended his hand. Welcome to your second chance, Ms. Parker. The next 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jessica assembled a diverse team of flight attendants, customer service representatives, and operations staff. Together, they reviewed policies, redesigned training programs, and created new procedures for everything from family boarding to accommodating passengers with hidden disabilities. Not everyone embraced the changes. Some veteran staff dismissed the initiative as public relations fluff. Others resented being asked to modify routines they'd followed for years. Jessica faced the resistance with newfound patience, remembering her own initial reactions. Change is hard, she acknowledged during a particularly contentious training session. But every passenger deserves our best, not just the ones who make our jobs easy. Gradually, the culture began to shift. Complaint rates dropped. Positive feedback increased. Social media mentions of Skyline Airways trended positive for the first time in years. 9 months into the initiative, Jessica was presenting quarterly results to the executive team when Martinez interrupted with an announcement. I've just received word that Skyline has been nominated for the Industry Excellence Award for Most Improved Customer Experience. He looked directly at Jessica. This is largely due to the work of Ms. Parker and her team. The executives applauded politely, but Jessica noticed several who had originally opposed the initiative now nodding with genuine approval. Data didn't lie. Passenger satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. After the meeting, Martinez asked Jessica to stay behind. The annual award ceremony is next month, he said. I'd like you to attend as part of the Skyline delegation. Of course, Jessica replied. I'll prepare the presentation materials. Not as staff, Martinez clarified. As a featured speaker. Your journey from, well, let's call it, customer service challenged to leading our most successful initiative. It's a powerful story. People need to hear it, Jessica blanched. You want me to publicly talk about how I humiliated your family? I want you to talk about transformation. How organizations change when individuals change. The awards committee has already approved the topic. The following month, Jessica found herself at a podium before hundreds of airline industry professionals. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. A year ago, she began, I was the flight attendant passengers hoped they wouldn't get. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. I prided myself on enforcing rules rather than serving people. Until the day I humiliated a family who, unknown to me, owned the airline. She shared her story honestly. The initial confrontation, the revelation, the difficult process of facing her biases, and the work of creating meaningful change. The most important lesson I learned, she concluded, is that exceptional service isn't about bending rules for important people. It's about recognizing that every person who boards our planes is important. Every child is someone's whole world. Every elderly passenger deserves dignity. Every nervous flyer needs reassurance. When we remember that, everything else falls into place. The applause was immediate and sustained. As Jessica returned to her seat, Martinez leaned over. Well said, he murmured, though I think you'll have an even tougher audience tomorrow. Tomorrow? My family has requested your presence at dinner. My son has some questions for you. Jessica's stomach tightened. Your son? The boy from the plane? Martinez nodded. He's been following the changes at the airline. He'd like to meet the person responsible, properly this time. The Martinez home was nothing like Jessica had imagined. Not a mansion or luxury penthouse, but a comfortable family home in a pleasant suburb. Carlos greeted her at the door, introducing his wife Anna and their children, 6-year-old Luis and 3-year-old Elena. Luis studied Jessica with open curiosity. You're the lady from the airplane, he said. Dad says you help make flying better now. Jessica knelt to his level. I am, and your dad is right. I'm trying to make things better. I'm sorry for how I acted when we met before. Luis considered this. Dad says everyone deserves second chances if they really want to change. Your dad is very wise, Jessica replied, glancing up at Carlos, who watched the interaction with quiet approval. Throughout dinner, Jessica was struck by the warmth of the family she had once dismissed so coldly. They shared stories about their travels, their business ventures, their commitment to treating people with dignity regardless of position or circumstance. As the evening wound down, Carlos walked Jessica to her car. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined inviting you into my home," he admitted. "A year ago, I wouldn't have deserved it," Jessica replied. "Thank you for seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself. That's the real key to good service, isn't it?" Carlos observed. "Seeing the best in people even when they're not at their best." Jessica nodded, understanding finally settling deep in her bones. It had never been about rigid rules or maintaining order. It had always been about seeing the humanity in every person who crossed her path. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror at the family standing in their doorway, the family whose worst day had become the catalyst for her best self. In trying to humiliate them, she had only revealed her own failings. In offering her redemption, they had shown true strength. Tomorrow she would return to headquarters and continue the work. There were more policies to change, more staff to train, more passengers whose experiences could be transformed. But tonight, for the first time in years, Jessica Parker drove home with the profound sense that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do.